All right, so step one of the assembly. So it looks like we're going to be inserting the 3 main arms into the top base. So I got it sitting upside down. And we're just going to grab one of these arms, and I think they're all the same. So they all will have 2 plugs, one motor plug and then one limit switch plug. So there's going to be 2 wires coming out of the base. So we need to move those out of the way. And then we're going to simply just set our motor in there. We need to be careful with the wires. So it looks like the wiring can go through this hole here. This frame here will line up with the holes on the base. And we're going to take our little baggie of bolts and we're going to start them. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, and we can go ahead and snug these up. So we could go ahead and plug our wires in, which is quite simple. The X here are labeled X and they go together. It's a black wire. And then our motor plug will plug in right into the stepper motor, just like that. So if you find it easier to plug it before you even screw these in, you could do that. So it doesn't really matter. Just make sure you're not going to pinch any wires anywhere between the metal. That would definitely be bad. So yeah, now we're going to do the same thing for the other 2 legs. Set it in there, grab our little bolts and snug them up. Plug our wires in, and that's it. Move to the other foot. All right, so the 3 legs are on, and this is what it looks like. So for step 2, we're going to connect the other end of the legs to the base frame where the bed is, and that's this piece here. And so the legs are going to sit right here on each corner. So I'm going to grab the printer and flip it around. Now make sure you line the front of the printer, which is where the screen is, to here where the logo is. So we're just going to simply set it over, just like that. And same little bolts will go right here. There's 2 of them on each side of the leg. So yeah guys, as you can see so far, this is a very straightforward and easy assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and snug these up, and we're going to do the other 2. All right, and so this is what it looks like so far, and look how low the build plate is. I really like this design. It's different. Normally the electronics are on the bottom, but here they're on the top, so definitely a really unique feel to have it this low. All right, so step 3 is installing all of our arms. So these are the arms that go between the hot end and the 3 corners. So they are shrink wrapped, and there are 6 of them, and we can see the little bolts are already pre-mounted, and the ball bearings in there are all metal, so that's nice to see. So they should be very tight tolerances with no slop, which is quite important for a Delta printer. All right, so we're going to just grab 2 of these, and then we're going to grab our hot end. I'm going to go ahead and take this little sensor off so it doesn't fall off. And here we can see the mounting bracket. There's threads at the end of it, and we're going to start the bolt right on there. So just like that, and there's going to be an arm on each end. And by the way, they do have some Loctite on the threads, so it doesn't unscrew itself. And then we're going to take our wrench and tighten it, but be careful when you tighten this because you don't want to over tighten it because these are very small threads. And that's it, and that's what one of the arms will look like. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put all of the braces on the hot end, and then we'll connect them to each of the legs. So all of the rods are on, and you guys can see how that goes. So it's quite simple. Now they are going to point up like this with the nozzle going down. But before we install them into the ends, we need to make sure that our rollers on the inside, this does travel on the channel around it, that they're nice and smooth. So this one is very smooth and there's no play in it. This one is, I think, too tight because, yeah, it is. It's holding up in places. So that means one of the rollers are way too tight. This one in the back feels perfect. Very smooth, and it doesn't move around. So these 2 are good, but this one, if you go up and down and you feel any kind of bumpiness or jumpiness or grabbiness, that means that the roller is probably too tight. So what we need to do is adjust that roller. So if you look on this side, you can see there's a cover, and on the other end, we have 2 bolts here that hold that cover. So we can go ahead and undo them, and that's going to cut the cover loose. And now if we go to the side, we can see our little rollers here. I can see that they're way too tight because if I try to spin one, I can't even do it. And so this adjusts the same way as a normal 3D printer. There's 2 stationary rollers, and then there's one that has an eccentric nut. And that's what this provided wrench is for, is to turn this eccentric nut, to loosen and tighten this roller. It looks like when you loosen it a little more. Now when you do get it just right, there is a bolt here that we'll have to tighten. And you might want to go ahead and do it right off the bat, and then fine tune it here. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to make the compression between the channel here, it's just barely tight where you're able to still spin this roller. As you can see, I can spin it, but there is some friction to it. And so there's no wobble, and also the rollers are quite free to spin. And now we have a very smooth motion, and there's no grabbiness whatsoever. So if any of your sides are too tight or too loose, you definitely want to open this little cover up and adjust them. Now I can go ahead and put this cover back on. All right, so now that we know that all of our rollers are fine, we can go ahead and bring these up. And the reason you want them higher is because the rods, they go up to the brackets, so your nozzle goes down. And the way you want to orientate this, according to the manual, this corner here, if you can see, the cooling duct is on the right side and the magnetic is on the left, and it kind of goes on an angle like this. So here's a heat break fan, points literally at this left leg. So yeah, we're just gonna simply start these little bolts into our metal brackets right here. So now again, be very careful when you tighten these because they're quite little bolts and it's very easy to strip them. So yeah, we're simply just gonna go around and put all of our arms on the brackets. And just like that, all of our corners are on. And you guys can see how the head moves down there. It's very cool. So if you've never had a Delta printer, it's definitely something quite unique. The way the hot end travels on these arms seems very unusual. So yeah, everything looks good and it's all smooth. And so that leads us to the next step, which is 4, and that's installing the spool holder. So the spool holder just has 2 pieces here that come together, and we're going to be using the same little bolts we've been using for all the frame. And so there are threads on the other end, and the bolt will just screw into that. Now it is a little bit finicky because they're quite close together, but they do go on no problem. It's kind of interesting how they decided to go with this quite narrow and very thin part on the top. Maybe that's plenty for just about everything, or maybe they don't want you to put in the huge spool on there because it is going to be on top, and this printer is quite small, so it's probably not designed to hold anything more than a 2-kilogram spool. So there's 2 threaded holes on the top, and that'll line up with the bottom of the spool holder. And this does go to the front. Snug them up. All right, and our spool holder is on. And so here on the extruder side, we can see that our filament will go straight into the extruder and then out of the extruder into the print head. And believe it or not, guys, that is all of our assembly steps. The step 5 is connecting all the wiring. So connecting the wiring is very easy on this printer. So we only have a few plugs to plug. So this one here comes down from the bottom. This is the heated bed and the temperature sensor. And that's going to plug right here. So we got the bigger white plug for the power and a little black one for the temperature sensor. And then we have a few wires to connect here at the hot end. So they're all color coded: black to black, white to white, yellow to yellow, and red to red. And then we have one more left over, and that says level on it, so that will go to our leveling sensor. So whenever we do the leveling, we're gonna plug it in, and then when we're done, we just plug it out. All right, and for our last connection, we have the PTFE tubing, and that's gonna go straight to our extruder to the top. And so we're just gonna stretch it out and plug it into our extruder coupling here. But before we do, we need to pull out the little clips that holds the little tab. So we're just gonna simply push it in there as far as it goes, and then put our little clip back in there. All right, and so this is how it goes. Now we could zip tie it here a little bit, since it does stay together, the wiring and the tube. If we go all the way up here, we can see that they do want to stay together. So let's grab some of our provided zip ties. And by the way, there was a clean out needle with the zip ties. I didn't even notice it, it's so thin. So we're just gonna zip the wires and the PTFE tubing together. You definitely don't want to zip anything to these arms or anything else, just together to themselves. And this will give it some form as it travels, so it kind of stays together. All right, so we're just gonna cut off the excess. And that's it. That looks much better and cleaner. And so that is the whole assembly process. And as you guys saw, that was not very difficult to put together and actually quite simple. So if you're intimidated by Delta printers, this one here is a great place to start because it's quite simple and goes together quite easy.